Hello, my name's Lauren O'Connor, and I'm an accessibility specialist with the Disability Equity Office. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about accessible event planning. This is part one of a two-part series, and this webinar is focused on digital marketing and alternative text. For today's agenda, I want to start by talking about the fact that the University of Michigan is committed to fostering an inclusive environment where accessibility and the needs of individuals with disabilities are prioritized, ensuring equitable opportunities for all members of our diverse community. Today's workshop is going to cover digital accessibility, effective alt texts for digital images, alternative text in social media and marketing materials. If this were a live webinar, we would be doing an alt text interactive activity. But for learning purposes, we are going to do a practice session that I will walk you through as a viewer. And then I'm going to wrap up with going over some considerations before having your event. So digital accessibility. This topic is a large one, and there are many important aspects of digital accessibility. So I've linked relatable topic presentations that are upcoming in the Happening at Michigan slide, as well as applicable workshops that have been pre-recorded by our Disability Equity Office resources section so that you're able to explore more specific topics in this realm in more detail. If you are planning an event, a meeting, or a conference, you'll likely begin with forms of marketing and advertising when preparing for your event. So, as we're on a large campus, much of this would be completed digitally. So, we're going to talk about how we can plan an accessible event from the very start. So, just a few pointers before we get into our topics. I want to go over some information I've pulled from our past presentations that are a helpful beginner part of digital accessibility. This one is about typography. So, sans serif versus serif fonts. It's recommended that individuals use what's called a sans serif font, and the example that we have here is Verdana. Other examples include Tahoma, Arial, and Lucida Sans. For reference on the slide, this is the example at the top left. What we want to avoid are fonts that have serifs. So this is the bottom left. And these are fonts like Garamond that have extra embellishments, which can make them harder to read. These extra little pieces can create a visual discrepancy that might be difficult to see which letter is which. The next item I want to go over for digital accessibility is links. So when we're linking any kind of web content, it should be very visually distinguishable from the remainder of the text you're presenting. So to start, we don't want to underline text that isn't a link. Even if we're just trying to emphasize content, we can use bold text, italices, or both if we're wanting to show that emphasis. Additionally, the text for the link should describe what happens when it's clicked. So we want to avoid things like click here or follow this link, as they don't distinguish what would happen. Helpful alternatives are things like learn more about accessibility or digital accessibility help with ECRT. An easy way to make sure that your link is helpful is to ignore the surrounding content and language, and then ask yourself, does reading just the link text alone provide enough information to know what the link is going to do or where it's going to lead? All links should have unique names so that it's obvious that these are for different destinations. Next, in your marketing and advertising materials, it's really important to consider color. So when you're choosing color for these types of marketing materials, you want to avoid things like just black and white, as these can actually create too much contrast and lead to a screen glare. When you are trying to select which color you want to have available, it's really helpful if you download the color contrast analyzer. I have it linked on the slide here, and you can get this from the Software Center. This application helps to check all of your print and electronic materials to make sure that they have a minimum color contrast of 4.5 to 1 ratio. On here, we have an example of a low contrast. This is a purple background with blue font, and this is hard to read. It's difficult for my eyes to make that distinguishment on what those letters are saying. Whereas something with high contrast, we have the Michigan blue on our white background. This is easier to read, but not too large of a difference, such as the black and white, where it can create that glare. It's always helpful when you're trying to create a larger color contrast to consider light text on dark backgrounds or dark text on light backgrounds. And if you're looking to maintain U of M's colors throughout your advertising materials or presentations, I've linked the University of Michigan's brand color guide, which is similar to the colors that we're using here in today's slides. As you see in our header, we have the yellow on blue. Further, when talking about the importance of color, we want to consider how we convey information. So color shouldn't be the only means of relaying information. The top two pie charts we have over here on the left just have color. So one has orange, blue, and green, and the other is just different grayscale. So if somebody experiences color blindness, they wouldn't be able to decipher and distinguish which part of that pie graph has a different amount if we're strictly saying the orange section represents X, blue represents Y, green represents Z. So in the second two below, we have yes, no, and maybe listed within each section. So by including text descriptors, this can help individuals who have a visual disability such as color blindness. Now that we've gone over some of our intro to digital accessibility, I want to talk about effective alt text because most of our marketing materials and advertisements or our web pages, they include images and different graphics to help get a point across of what we're trying to be marketing or try to encompass the event that we'll be hosting. So we want to make sure that these images can be read aloud for individuals who can't otherwise see them. Now, if you're not familiar what exactly this alt text is, it's summarized for alternative text. This helps individuals who have a visual impairment to understand the meaning of an image. It can also help because it'll be displayed when an image fails to load on a website. Some helpful tips for creating alt text are to keep it short and descriptive. So you may want to ask yourself, why am I sharing this image? What's the purpose of including this image? And otherwise, how would I describe this image if I was talking to somebody on the phone who couldn't see it? A helpful pointer is to not include the words image of or photo of in the description, as this would be part of the alt text that's already included. But we may want to indicate if it's a satellite image or if it's a graph to help distinguish what exactly we're seeing here and if it's different than just a standard photo. Linked within the speaker notes of this slide, we do have the accessibility at the University of Michigan webpage if you want to learn more about alternative text. Now, I was talking about some of those questions you may ask yourself. When would I use alt text? This is the alternative text decision tree from the WCAG, the WCAG Web Content Accessibility Guidelines to help you make that decision on do I need to include alt text? So first you want to ask, did I include an image? If you didn't, you don't need to include any alt text. But if you did, you want to ask those questions I mentioned on the previous slide. But one thing to consider is if you only put it on there for decoration, it doesn't add any information or content, you don't need to include alt text. There is a checkbox you can select and you can mark that image simply as decorative. Some more considerations when you're creating alt text. So as I said earlier, we can consider if we're on the phone with somebody describing it. So some things that you may include in that description is the subject and providing that in detail, the setting that you see in that image, the actions or interactions, and any other relevant information. You also want to consider, is there any information included that the image relies upon sight to understand? These are things such as a location of an activity or the time or date that the photo might be occurring. And like I said earlier, we'll have some examples in a practice session a little bit later in this presentation. So the next two slides are just some quick tips for writing alt text. This one says that you don't necessarily need to say image of in front of your alt text, as I said earlier, for the user to know it's an image. Screen readers are going to announce that it's an image, but it can be helpful for readers to specify if it's a hand-drawn image, a Polaroid, an infographic, a screenshot, chart, map, diagram, and so on. So alt text isn't the same as a photo caption. Captions are typically written to support a photo, and they usually do depend on users being able to see that photo. Alt text otherwise is meant to be a stand-in for the photo. So it's what a screen reader would get in place of being able to visually discern the image. Another tip that we have from accessibility awareness is to use plain language and eliminate buried verbs. For example, he is in compliance with local laws can become he complies with local laws. Another example is he exhibits resistance to change can become he resists change. So we want to keep it simple. We want to keep the content short and to the point. Use short but logical sentences. Present information first in each section, then subsection, and then paragraph. Include details that help readers complete the task or objective of the alt text, and then leave out and omit any details that don't help and may distract readers, even if it is interesting. Now, there are some more complex photos that we may have to describe at times. And so there is a suggested complex image formula that individuals can use. So this was created by a data visualization designer, Mary Cecil, who suggested that this formula be used for anything that's really complex or contains a lot of information. You would indicate what type of chart it is, what type of data it is, and then where and the reason for including the chart. So I'll start by giving an example. I attended a conference actually about digital accessibility down in Orlando, Florida. And for our practice, they put up a Disney World park map. This included all of Disney's parks, all of their rides, their attractions, food, you name it. And they told us create a simple and concise alt text for this image. It's pretty difficult to decipher what was most important and what we were trying to get across. So something that we came up with using part of this is that you're indicating it's a map of various rides, shows, and attractions where you can experience Disney magic at each of their individual Disney World theme parks. It gave an overall summary, but it didn't get down into the nitty-gritty detail that was so granular of what was in that map. Another example that we have here, and you can find on some of our other disability equity office presentations, is of our miniature horse. So the context for this example, your presentation is about service animals. Helpful alt text may be a brown miniature horse wearing a purple vest with white wording that says, "Do not touch, service animal on duty." The horse is also wearing a purple harness and white shoes. Ineffective alt text for an individual who may not be able to see the photo are simply stating an animal or a picture of a miniature horse, because this wouldn't convey the importance that this presentation is related to service animals. Another hot topic when discussing alt text is AI generated alt text. So, AI generated alt text, it is getting better, but it's not always useful. Additionally, an accessibility check likely won't pick up on what's considered bad alt text because it's simply making sure that there's any alt text included. So this does mean that you should always verify what has been AI generated and edit accordingly. So for our photo on the top left, the one from our last slide, the AI generated text was a pony being carried by a person. And if you're able to see this photo, you may be able to tell that this is neither a pony nor a person carrying one. On the bottom left, we have another image that we had AI generate some alternative text, and it came out with a horse and pony with red blankets. So although this is better than the last example, it may still need to be modified depending on what exactly you're trying to convey with this image. So a better alt text for this one might be a dark horse in the middle, accompanied by two miniature horses on each side, which are both wearing red covers. The miniature horse on the bottom left is brown, and the one on the right is white. Now that we have a little bit of basis of some of our digital accessibility and how we can use that in marketing, we want to talk about applying the concepts of digital technology and alt text specific to their marketing materials and social media advertisement when planning an event. So you might wonder, this alt text that I just talked about, where is this located? Is it just on PowerPoints? Is it on websites? Well, really, it's on many things. So you want to ask yourself, do you plan on using flyers, virtual newsletters, email, social media? Alt text can be located on each one of these forums and should be utilized if important contextual images are being included. So for the sake of time, I don't plan on going in depth for each of these options, but I have included detailed steps on how to add alt text for each of the platforms listed here, which we have Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Google Docs, Google Suites, Facebook, Twitter or X, and Instagram. The important information is just knowing the importance of using alternative text and ensuring that we are integrating it into our practices. So as I stated, I would show some different slides here real quick without getting too detailed. But if you're adding alternative text to Microsoft Word and PowerPoint, when you have an image, you would be able to right click on it, choose View Alt Text or Edit Alt Text, and then you can type in the description of the image that you would like. Again, if you're wanting it just for decorative purposes and not to add context, you can mark those as decorative. The next one I have here is Google Docs and Google Slides. Same concept. You can right click on your image. This one, you will be selecting the alt text option. A box will appear in the bottom right, and then you can add in your alternative text in the description box, or again, mark it as decorative as necessary. For more of our social media advertising, a little bit different, but you would go to your Facebook post for Facebook specifically and tap on the photo. There would be three dots that appear in the top right, and you would tap on those and hold. For the same concept, we're looking for language that revolves around editing the alt text. Now, when using social media, we may come across more of this AI generated alt text or things such as image may contain. So this is where you're able to edit and save that alt text. At the bottom is a link to the Facebook Help Center if you need additional details or steps on how to edit and create alt text on Facebook. X or Twitter is similar as the Facebook one, so I won't go into too much detail. Again, I have linked their Help Center here for your reference. I do want to talk about a concept that comes up with Twitter or X. So your alt text length depends on the length of the content. But for this platform specifically, it allows 1,000 characters. That does not mean you should go that long. So some sources suggest 120 to 150 characters when creating alt text. But these recommendations are variable depending who you're seeking this information from. So again, I really want to emphasize, write what you need, but don't add more if it's not necessary for the context of that photo. And then Instagram is our last one that we have in this section. And when you are uploading an existing photo, you can choose a filter and edit the image. When you're clicking next, there's an option for accessibility where you're able to write alternative text in that box prior to sharing your post. Similar to our last two social media platforms, I have the Instagram Help Center linked here for additional assistance and support if needed. Now, earlier I stated that when presenting this live, we do an interactive activity and we do have our audience engage and participate. But for today's purpose, I still want to go through these examples as they're really helpful, especially if you're more in the introduction stages of alternative text. So I'm going to go through this practice and display images as well as some thought-provoking questions that could come with them. So our alt text example one that's used in the presentation. On the right, it does rely on sight to be able to see these images to actively participate, but we have an image of an individual. It's split. There is an individual at the top and an individual at the bottom. So in our interactive activity, we would generally ask if you can choose what the better text description is. For today's learning purposes, I'll read both and talk through it. So the first option is meme with text. Monday, April 14, Tuesday, April 15, springtime in Michigan. You might quickly be able to realize that that is not the better alt text, as we're not sure without being able to see the image what these dates are referring to. So the second better alt text option is meme labeled springtime in Michigan with two photos arranged top and bottom. Top photo. Monday, April 14, with an individual sitting on their patio in shorts and a t-shirt with green grass in the yard. Bottom photo. Tuesday, April 15, the same person pictured in the same spot, however, wearing a winter coat, boots, and gloves with snow in the yard. Now, you might think from a character standpoint, this one is pretty long. It can absolutely be summarized and can be consolidated to something smaller. But it shows that if we're leaving out those important details, without being able to see the image, we truly would not understand what that first option is trying to display to us. And if you live in Michigan, you're well aware of how our weather can change rapidly overnight. So that context is helpful. In this next example, the text options are much shorter than the last one. So, like I said, alt text doesn't have to be long. Rather, it is recommended to stay within a character parameter. But when you read the two alt text options listed in this example, you may picture two very different things. So the first one is Lake Michigan. Your second choice for alt text is satellite image of Lake Michigan. Now, if I was describing the first example, Lake Michigan, over the phone to somebody, we want to consider what they might be picturing. When I hear Lake Michigan, my mind's going to the West Coast. I'm looking at a body of water on a beach, maybe with a sunset. And that is not what we have pictured here on this slide. So, as previously stated, we don't have to put photo of or image of in alt text, as the screen reader does already include this, but it can be really important to include details like satellite image of, chart of, map of, as these are specifying details that really help you to understand what's being displayed. Now, this is an alt text practice where I have the viewers or participants write in what they would share. So it says to generate an alt text description for these. I, however, will do so for you and we'll talk about it. So the first image we have on the top is a pair of white Crocs on a brown wood floor. So that's my alt text for it. The image below it has the alt text that I created of a crocodile reptile emerging from muddy brown water. Now, when we do this live, I do ask if anybody can contribute what a bad alt text example would be that represents both images and the reason why we want to include context to really discern what these images are showing. Now, if I used AI generated alternative text and it said Crocs, that could apply to both the top and bottom image. So we want to make sure that we're really displaying the difference between these two. All right, and thank you for sticking with me. This is the last one of our practice. This is another one where I would ask the audience to generate their own alt text and get the opportunity to practice. So the first practice is having them write an effective alternative text for the combined images above. So there are three images, but they're actually all fused into one photo. So an example of alt text for this could be three Wolverines pictured from left to right. The first one on the left is a brown furry Wolverine animal. The second in the middle is Hugh Jackman with disheveled hair, a beard, a white tank top, holding blades between each of his fingers as Marvel's Wolverine. And the last image on the right is the Michigan Wolverine football team waving their flags after a win. So you see, these are all very different examples of what a Wolverine could be, depending on somebody's background, interests, or where they're from. For this one, we do the same thing as the Croc example, and I generally ask the audience to contribute an example of what a bad alt text could be. And one that could be misleading is just the word Wolverines, because it is true. There are a number of Wolverines in this fused image. However, we want to display the differences between each one being shown here. All right, now that we have talked about digital accessibility, alt text, practicing putting our alt text into social media and different advertising platforms, and now we've got the opportunity to go over some practice for effective alt text and ineffective options. We want to go over some last considerations before you're having an accessible event, meeting, or conference. In our part two of this presentation, we go more in depth about the physical and sensory environment. So please be sure to check that out if that is an area you're interested in. But before the event, from a more digital standpoint, we want to make sure that all registration materials in digital documents are accessible. So we want to include resources for attendees to be able to utilize in their planning. These are things like maps, wayfinding signs, information about parking that's available to them, and be certain that you relay your expectations in your planning communication. So when you are putting out that marketing material, include the date and time frame of your conference, your meeting or event, where it's going to be held, specifications on that location, what parking might be available, what accessible routes are nearby. Include information about retreat spaces or lactation spaces for those who may need to utilize it during the event. And then always be certain to include an agenda. This allows people to know when scheduled breaks are, if there are different event activities they want to check out, and it allows them to plan ahead for their own needs. In your marketing materials, you also want to include information about all proactive measures. So these are things like inviting participants to identify if they have an accommodation need. So if they are seeking out maybe paratransit to get to the event, or if they need to have access to where that retreat space is, if they need a place to go and decompress or take breaks between activities. This also includes food allergies and chemical sensitivities. So, considering what all is going to be in that space and how people may react to what is present. You can promote and advertise using a variety of media. So, email, social media, websites, flyers, and posters. But like I said earlier, when we're creating marketing materials, we want to pay attention to the readability and visibility so that all participants can follow along with the content and find the information they need easily. This also helps to increase participation and make your event more inclusive to those attending. Now, if you're going to have handouts, presentations, or infographics, whether these are things being provided out physically or digitally, you want to strive for simplicity and good readability. So we want to write in plain language. An example would be if you're using acronyms, make sure that you're writing out the meaning of each letter and explaining jargon or complex terms that maybe are specific to your department, but other individuals may not be as familiar with. And then have summaries of text and be concise. We want to make sure that marketing materials are available before the event so people can access it, plan, prepare, maybe have questions from reviewing it in advance, have access to it during if they need to reference it throughout, and after to be able to reflect, go back, and consider what questions they may have. For more information on other resources and accessible materials, I've linked the Improving Accessibility of Word and PowerPoint Files presentation from our office, as well as I have linked the website for U of M's Digital Accessibility Guide for content creators and presenters. So, in making these items for your event, just consider the content from the digital accessibility segment earlier in this presentation, in addition to your current um, make sure that you are making these digitally accessible and you're also including what content you need to be providing to market and catch the attention of your audience. So, as we're sending out the invitation or registration for our presentations, or if you're having a departmental meeting, a workshop, or a conference, we really encourage that you utilize the following language to ensure that individuals know to contact the training organizer if they anticipate that accommodations will be needed. So, some language for the event is if you need disability related accommodations to participate in this program or event, please contact. You'll want to include the name, the host department or unit, at, and include their email and phone number. Early requests are strongly encouraged to allow sufficient time to meet your needs. You may also include language if you are looking for American Sign Language interpreters or CART services that states, due to availability and scheduling needs, please allow at least 2 weeks' notice for requests for communication access real-time translation, or CART, services, or an American Sign Language interpreter. This helps create expectations and planning for all parties involved. Additional language to include for your event, more specifically, if you're including an in-person one where food may be served, it's important to include language such as if you have dietary restrictions or allergies, please contact. And again, we want the name, the host's department, the phone number, and email so that alternative arrangements can be made and an awareness of allergies is available. Another important thing that you want to put out is an access statement. So, an access statement informs participants of the accessible resources that are already available at the event. So, these are things they don't have to seek individual accommodations for, but they know are already included in your event. These are things such as the location, address, parking information. It's helpful if you even include the points of entry to the building, elevator and ramp locations for those seeking alternative routes beyond stairs, restroom types and locations. This is where you can also include if there will be CART and ASL services available, if the event's going to be scent free, if you're going to have certain allergens, and similar topics to create an awareness for individuals. Access and accommodation statements should be included in RSVP forms, emails, calendar invites, and other marketing materials you plan to use. Now, I know I just gave a lot of examples of what could be put in an access statement. So I've included an example here for you. And it states accessible entrance through adjacent buildings, or you would then state what directional route, corner ground floor, entrance of, and state the building. From the directional entrance of the elevators down the hall and you'd want to include the direction left, right, or both side. The event is on number floor so that we know which floor we're going to in room blank. You'll also want to decipher what type of restrooms are available on what floor number and what they're near. Is it stairs, an elevator, or a room number? A certain marking point to help with individuals locating that. The following services are provided for this event: American Sign Language interpretation, communication access, real-time translation, etc. Now, I know this may seem like a lot, but please know those things that are in brackets are optional and just to help provide some guidance. This content has been modified from the Accessible and Inclusive Resource Guide. This is just simply an example. It can again be modified however you need to include information for things such as lactation rooms or areas for breaks, as I previously stated. For an accommodation statement, when we're wanting to allow individuals to seek out individualized accommodations, you want to state the commitment to accessibility and a willingness to make accommodations. This helps provide a space for participants to let the planner know what resources they individually need to fully participate. You can help by describing the event so individuals can assess what their own needs are, and invite people to contact the host or organizer if they anticipate that they will need accommodations based off of all of the information they've been provided to prepare for your event or meeting. An example of an accommodation statement could be, please let us know how we can ensure that this event is inclusive to you. What accommodations or access needs can we help facilitate? Now, it is really important. We don't want to just put that question out there. You need to be able to follow up with requesters as they do indicate their needs so that they know if and how their requests are going to be honored. And then lastly, I want to wrap up with this final slide that just goes over some general considerations. So I'm going to go more into these considerations in part 2 of this presentation, but I did want to begin talking about them, getting our wheels spinning about these ideas, as many of the behind the scenes events within your event planning are occurring at the same time as your advertising and marketing. So it's generally not just we're doing our digital piece and then getting into the physical piece. We're planning ahead for what this event's going to look like, and we're marketing it simultaneously. So when you're selecting an event venue, it's recommended that you consult with your building facilities, IT, and an AV team to see if the space and event needs are possible before booking the event. If possible, it's really helpful to tour the space prior to your event or meeting, because then you can see what barriers may be present, what modifications may need to be made, or what resources you will need to acquire to increase the accessibility of it. And what you'll want to consider during that tour is the physical accessibility. These are things like the location, the elevator or stair access, ramp access. Is there a stage? Do we have a wheelchair accessible space or automatic door openers? You'll want to consider the digital accessibility, which we talked about today. And we have more detailed presentations you can check out if you want to go in more detail. You'll also want to assess the ergonomics or layout of the space. These can be things like, does it include a variety of chair options with space around them? Do we have chairs that come with or without arms to provide more flexible seating arrangements? Do we also have various table options and heights? And then lastly, assessing the sensory needs of this space. So we want to pay attention to our own senses while we're in there: auditory, visual, thermoregulatory. We want to avoid spaces with ongoing construction nearby, new carpeting, newly painted walls, or recently used chemicals, because those can really impact individuals who have a smell sensitivity. Same with our lighting. A way to make your space more accessible is to have variety and variability in your space. So, are there blinds or natural lighting options? Do we have dimmers? Can we turn off the lights and have floor lamps? We just want to make sure that there are options available or that we can bring resources in to accommodate individuals as needed. And then lastly, in terms of auditory distractions, thin walls can be really distracting in terms of sound clarity in the room, or like I had mentioned, ongoing construction can be loud and distracting. We want to make sure that those attending our meetings on campus, our conferences, our events, that they're able to be as present and attentive as they need to be so that they can get everything that they need to out of your learning opportunities in these accessible spaces. So I want to thank everyone for being with me for the duration of our workshop today and just learning more about how we can make our spaces more inclusive. Again, if you're interested in learning more about the physical space and the actual implementation of making a more accessible space for your event, please check out the part 2 of these series. But again, I appreciate you for sticking with me, and I hope you have a good one.